Hey there, everybody. Pete Pardo here from Sea Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of our RANT series. Today, we've got extra special guests once again, George and Craig Sybert from the Music Musing podcast. Guys, welcome to the show. Great to have you on here again. So today's topic, all right, this is based on some conversations that I've seen amongst numerous viewers on the channel in recent weeks about how there are too few bands out there in the history of rock music and music in general who have released more than like 3 great albums in a row. And I've heard some people say that most bands, if you go to kind of investigate their discography, you can maybe find 3 really decent albums, and that's about it. So we're here to debunk that theory. So Craig, George, and myself, what we've done is we've put together a list of 5 bands that we like who have released 3 or more classic albums, in our opinion, in a row at some point during their careers. So Craig and George, say hello. And
hey, guys.
George, how about you? Hello.
What's happening? Glad to be back. This is why we do this. Fun conversations like this.
Absolutely. So, George, since you were the last one to talk here, you'll be the first one to give your first band. What we'll do, guys, is we're going to go kind of round robin. So we'll each give one band. We'll talk about those albums in question and why we think they're so great. And George will get us started.
I guess I'll start with the easy one. Def Leppard was the first band I thought of when you brought this up. They're On Through the Night, High and Dry, Pyromania, Hysteria, clear into the late 80s. They started. I'm not 100%. I don't know if On Through the Night was 79 or 80. I think it was late 70s, early 80s. But anyway, they had like a 7-year run there where they released 4 great albums in a row, and On Through the Night and High and Dry, Pyromania, and I think Pyromania and Hysteria probably get most of the notoriety, but their first 2 albums were just
phenomenal. Yeah.
Blazing raw. I mean, they really stood out in a sea of mediocrity, I think, in that kind of odd time frame. There was some punk going on in the late 70s, early 80s, and there was some, I think rock was kind of finding its way, and they were just kind of a breath of fresh air. And then to me, Pyromania especially, and Hysteria is set like all kinds of records for number ones and all that stuff, and especially after Rick Allen lost his arm and stuff in that car accident. So that was the first band I thought of when you brought this up. So
yeah, and I kind of agree with you on this. I think maybe for some people, Hysteria maybe is a bit overplayed, especially if you kind of, we were young when that was really popular. And for some people,
sure.
God, I heard that album so many times, but man, that album was massive, right?
I think it had like 7 number 1 hits or something. It was obscene how many songs came off that Hysteria album. But again, I'm kind of leaning towards the overplayed, but you can't deny its prowess or its sales or its notoriety, if nothing else. I mean, so it has to be.
How many million copies did that sell? Like what, 10 million, 8 million? I don't even remember. More than that, probably. I don't even remember. A lot.
If I had a number off the top of my head, I would say it was like closer to 20. I'd say it was because it spent like some obscene amount of weeks at number 1. I mean, it was ridiculous. But
again, 2 times platinum in the UK and 12 times platinum in the US.
Oh, there you go. So 12 million albums.
And I tell you, 2 million copies in the UK, that's a lot.
Yeah.
The UK, if you look at like these big albums from the 80s and you look at the UK versus US sales, the U.S. usually is ridiculously more. Obviously, a lot more people here and everything.
Well, I was going to say there's like 12 people who live on the island, right? So.
Just a joke for all our UK viewers.
Yes, no, and we love all 12 of you.
Craig, what do you got? What's your first pick?
Well, interesting. I wanted to let you guys finish up, but that Def Leppard album, that kind of bookend to their 3 or 4 that you're talking about there, was kind of interesting because, what did they put out after that?
That was the last, right? That was, they put out albums after that, but that was the last big one.
Right. Yeah. That's what I was going to say. And I think you started this off with bands you like. And I don't know, there's 2 on my list that I'm not a huge fan of. I mean, I'll dig their music, but actually I'll start with the first one then, is Aerosmith. I actually kind of went into this whole idea looking at the first albums to think, oh, well, was their first 3 albums the albums that put them on the map? And surprisingly enough, Aerosmith's first couple albums weren't that great. They had some good songs on it. I loved a lot of the songs off, the original Aerosmith album. But Toys in the Attic, Rocks, Draw the Line, and even At Night in the Ruts actually has a couple decent songs on it. But those albums, like right in a row, were amazing albums. And there's iconic songs off like each and every single one of those.
Yeah.
So that was kind of again, I'm not a huge Aerosmith fan. When they're on. I listen to them. I don't like their 80s, 90s stuff. I could care less for it. But their early stuff was really good. That was roots rock for them. And that's probably my number 5 would be those 3 or 4 albums right there in a row.
And I think, you make a great argument there that potentially the first album and Get Your Wings as well could be included in that run. I mean, there's a lot of people who love those albums, and maybe you're right, those weren't their biggest sellers by any means, and they were still kind of getting their feet off the ground.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of classic Aerosmith tracks in those first 2 albums. They made me strong through and through like the other ones you mentioned, but I would argue that every 70s album they released potentially is a classic.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that, Toys in the Attic is still one of the ones that I will put on and listen to on a regular basis, but the rest of their stuff is kind of pick and choose. But Toys in the Attic is an amazing album. So that's kind of where I went as soon as I thought about it. Like Aerosmith's got a lot of albums. They have to have 3 or 4 pretty close to each other. So,
and there's always the classic argument, which album is better, Toys in the Attic or Rocks? Because I think most hardcore Aerosmith fans, those are by far their favorite albums. And I know a lot of people who always pick Rocks, and there are some days where I pick Rocks as well, but Toys in the Attic is a damn great album.
Yeah, I lean more towards Toys in the Attic, but I think Rocks has more of the more hit type songs on it. I mean, Back in the Saddle's almost a guaranteed for if you mention Aerosmith, but I'm more of the other Toys in the Attic album of myself. So yeah, that's my number 5.
Cool. So I just had to throw these guys out first because we're talking about classic albums in a row, and I think one of the bands, for me anyway, that exemplifies releasing a whole crap load of classic albums one after another to kick off their careers, Black Sabbath.
Oh, yeah.
The self-titled album, Paranoid, Master of Reality, Volume 4, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage. And I know there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be watching this like, well, Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die also, and Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules. So I personally don't consider – I like Technical Ecstasy. I'm not a big fan of Never Say Die. I love the Mob Rules and Heaven and Hell stuff. But I think with Technical Ecstasy, that is not, for me, a prime classic Black Sabbath album. It's very good. But I think the first album through Sabotage doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah, and I think that they kind of I'm actually going to compare Black Sabbath to the Grateful Dead here. So everybody sit down. Yeah, but I think that the Black Sabbath had, like you said, those first couple albums were massive hits. I mean, each one's got 2 or 3 hits on it, and their sound really kind of shaped what modern rock and metal turned into. But when you kind of got to those later albums, it felt like, they had a following. So they were willing to expand and kind of do weird and different things. Right. And they did. And they got people to follow them on the early albums. And those people kind of continued to follow them and follow them around on those later albums, which kind of made them a little bit popular. But I'm with you. As far as music-wise and sound-wise, I would go for the first 3 or 4.
No doubt.
Yep.
Absolutely. I mean, Black Sabbath, I mean, you like we said earlier, you can make an argument that all of their albums are classic. I mean, as far as Led Zeppelin, as far as Black Sabbath is concerned, there's really no. I mean, you can make the argument for most of these classic influential bands. I think you could make an argument that we talked about like a behind the scenes we talked about through Messenger was like, an honorable mention for bands that like all of their albums are just they get a pass because it's Black Sabbath, so that you can kind of consider them all great albums. Like you said, even if some of them aren't for you, and it's hard to deny the prowess or whatever, but once they start changing, or if they like one of the next bands I'm going to get into, they kind of the more albums that they got into, the more overproduced they got and the more
Metallica. Sorry.
No, this is not sold out, but I mean
Whoa.
Fighting words.
Well, brother, I know this is, we're kind of prefacing this whole thing with our podcast as well. But our new podcast is coming out tomorrow, this is Thursday. So our new one's coming out tomorrow. And we kind of talked about this with the, most overrated album ever. Are we basing it on money? Are we basing it on hits on the album? Are we basing it on our own opinion? We kind of had to take all of that into consideration. So
yeah, sure.
Yeah. I mean, Sabbath, those albums had a hit or two on them, but did they sell? Or,
Yeah, and they did. And actually, other than like the first two albums, probably no real, popular album cuts, but as far as hit singles, not much, but they sold a lot of albums.
A lot of albums, right.
A lot of albums and big tours and, the influences there. So I guess we have to look at like so many different aspects.
True.
What makes an album a classic, right? So.
Sure.
So what do you got for 4, brother?
This is the one that is kind of like my dark horse. I got turned on to this band not quite 10 years ago, 7, 8, 9 years ago, somewhere in there. And it's more bluesy than like the heavier stuff that I normally listen to. The Black Keys. Their first 6 albums are very raw, very, very. They're branded as a 2-piece band, singer, guitar player, and a drummer. But they do a lot of things, and they all touring musicians and so on and so forth, and recording band, backing band, and stuff like that. But the big come up was their initial album, The Thick Freakness, Rubber Factory, Magic Potion, Attack and Release, and Brothers. Their first 6 albums are, to me, front to back. I can listen to all of their albums because it comes at a time when, again, if I'm not, if Lamb of God or something isn't on, I tone it down. I mean, I like Stevie Ray Vaughan and the more the bluesy rock stuff, and they hit a note that wasn't. They found a niche that wasn't there for me that I had ever heard before. And their first 6 albums were very, very raw. And like I started to say before, they weren't polished. They literally recorded one in their basement, and they weren't overproduced. And then once they got the last 2 or 3 maybe albums here that they've released, they're studio albums. I mean, they're polished, they're recorded, they're, overdubbed and auto-tuned, but I mean, I like it when you can hear a band's rawness, when you can hear the, when the bass of the guitar actually rattles the head of the snare. I love that feel, kind of old school garage band feel in it. I really think you can pull 3 to 4 songs off each album, if not the whole album, to me, and they're not hugely mainstream or popular, but to me, if people want to go check out a mildly popular band that's getting some radio play now, they've got a new album. I think it's released and coming out end of June here, but they've got a lot. Their early stuff is really spectacular, really great, really raw feel. But it's something worth listening to, and I think they put out a number of albums in consecutive order that were just great stuff to listen to. So,
if memory serves me correctly, those are still pretty decent sellers.
Yeah. Oh yeah. They've sold a lot. I mean, with not a lot of, whatever you call it, marketing. Yeah, there we go. They weren't really, they were tour monsters. I mean, they would put out an album, they would tour for 2 years. I mean, there was 2 to 3 years between albums.
It's interesting you'd mention it. I was looking just to see, how much they sold. So they didn't make the chart for the first 2 albums at all in the U.S.
Really?
They placed 131st on the chart with Rubber Factory, 95th on Magic Potion, 14th on Attack and Release, and 3 on Brothers, 2 on El Camino.
Wow.
one on Turn Blue. So you could see where their popularity was rising. And, I think, Pete, when you reached out to us on this, I think my idea of this was I was going to find a lot in classic rock that I couldn't find in new rock. And one of my bands actually is, mid to late 90s. But I think I was actually going to call you out on this, brother. I was actually going to say that I didn't think that kind of fit in with what we were talking about. But the more I look at it and the more I think of what their music is and where they are in rock today, I think those albums are going to end up being what we were talking about with Aerosmith and with Black Sabbath. I think people are going to look back at those and go,
with the test of time. So
exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing too. When I was putting my list together, I don't have a lot of really more recent bands here because have we deemed anything released in the last 20 years or so as classics yet? Right. And if we were to do this 10, 20 years from now, would we be naming a lot of bands from the late 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s?
You'd almost have to. And I mean, I think that plays into Craig and I's podcast too, was, you know, it was the most overrated album in history. Well, I mean, I said something about Dookie, Green Day's, but can you put that up against Sgt. Pepper that's been out for, 40 years?
Right.
I mean, to me, they are what they are. We're not going off on that tangent yet, but I think you said that you have to give albums time before they can be considered classic. I mean, you don't consider things released this year or their album coming out a classic album yet. So,
well, am I next on the list? I'm next on the list, right? Okay. Well, I'll kind of dovetail into that. And my number 4 was actually Creed. And they're a newer band, but they've still been around for quite some time. I mean, first album was in '97. But those 3, kind of 3.5 albums that they put out were massive all around. I mean, there was 2 and 3 hits on each one. There were number 1 sellers in pretty much, 3 and 4 markets. And they're a newer band, but they were at a time where it was, it's kind of like the corporate rock time. There were a lot of bands out there that sounded a lot like them, but they seemed to hit really good and have put out albums that you're listen to either a new rock or a classic rock station on the radio. Like, I know George listens all the time to the radio. You're going to hear one of those songs. One of those songs are going to come up at some point. And that was my number 4 on my list because they only put out 4 albums because they broke up after that. But every one of those is, I mean, they're going to be looked at in history as classic rock albums at some point.
And if you want to do an extension on Creed, let's look at the band that kind of came in the wake.
Oh, yeah.
Like Alter Bridge.
Yep.
Quite frankly, every Alter Bridge album is fantastic.
Yep.
They've just even though it's basically the same band without the original, whatever his
Scott Stapp.
Yeah.
And they just continued on making, in my opinion, even better music. So that's a pretty good track record of musical excellence.
Yeah, agreed.
And kind of side note quickly, I mean, Tremonti's solo project is he's putting out some quality music also. I
do love it, but I don't think it's going to fall within these type of.
Oh no! But I mean, he's a great guitar player, and he's making music that he wants to make, and it was just kind of a sidebar to all that since he was the guitar player.
Yep.
I'll go on record as saying that Tremonti stuff is also pretty fantastic. Great guitar player, and he's a really good singer too.
Yeah.
All right, so I have such a big list here, so I got to just kind of which ones I want to talk about. So I'm gonna go. So George mentioned at the top of the show about bands, in our opinion, that never released a bad album. So that's what I'm going to throw out here right now. And I'm going to go way back on this one. The Doors. I honestly don't think the Doors ever released a bad album, and I think every one of their albums is a classic. I don't care what anybody says. The Doors. Strange Days, Waiting for the Sun, Soft Parade, Morrison Hotel, LA Woman. Every album is just effing great. There you have it.
I'll let George talk here.
What did you say something?
Look,
this falls into
I'm going to talk. I'm not going to let you talk. No, you're done. You're done. So I agree that it fits with what we're talking about. George and I aren't Doors fans. I'm probably more than he is. I kind of like their allure sometimes more than I like their music because of the mix of the different types of musicians and people and stuff that were in that band. And they made some amazing hits that are going to stand the test of time. And you're right, though. I think all of those albums are going to stick out as albums that had hits on them, albums that will be remembered as rock albums. And I think the mystery of him disappearing even makes those more iconic because of that story. I mean, just enough. But again, the music on it was good. So,
Yeah,
okay, go ahead.
All of them great sellers and hit singles up and down on every single one. So,
But
I totally get if you don't like them. I mean, there was a time where I didn't like the Doors much either, but I love them as I've gotten older. But
it's undeniable. They're absolutely undeniable. I mean, that's Craig and I go through this periodically too. There's a number of bands that I say I don't like. When I say I don't like them, I've heard them enough. I've heard enough of them, I guess. So it's not that I dislike the band. I just dislike the repetitiveness. I do like a little freshness, a little something different. And I wasn't really into the psychedelic rock of the Doors. I get it. I do understand the influence and again, undeniable. I mean, pick an album, you can probably name at least a couple songs off of them, and the musicianship is second rate, and Morrison's writing and performance is obviously legendary and unmistakable. And I mean, although not a true fan of the Doors, props 100% of the time for what they did for that type of rock, psychedelic rock, and so on and so forth. That's
as a side note, has he actually been declared dead yet or not?
Yeah, I think so. I've read so many books on Jim Morrison. Man, that's like the most mysterious, like rock death ever. I mean, it's bizarre. It's just so bizarre.
Okay.
You have to wonder, and we don't want to go off the rails on this because this could be a topic for you have to wonder if it wasn't for the mysterious, crazy genius that was Jim Morrison, would the Doors ever have been as big as they were?
Yeah, I agree.
There's your next what if.
Yeah, there you go. That's our next one.
There you go. Write that one down.
Just say write that down now before we forget. Yeah.
I will urge you both, though, if you're not being big Doors fans, what I always find interesting is to go and listen to the Doors catalog and skip all the hits and listen to all those deep album cuts. Some great stuff there.
It's a good idea.
A lot of people have never heard before. Yeah,
I will take that under advisement and certainly do that, because I've never really delved into them because like you said, the hits I just kind of pass over, and it's never really
many hits. It's crazy how many Doors hits there were.
Oh yeah, no. You just think of one, and you think, oh yeah, and that, and that, and that.
What do you got, George?
Well, so we talked about you guys are more classic, and we didn't really get into too many newer bands, but my top three are actually 90. Well, one of them is probably late 80s, but my number three is Pantera, because if you skip their hair metal and spandex first couple displays of...
All right, hold on before you continue. I actually went this week and listened to all four of those first Pantera albums.
Yeah, they're not bad.
And they're not hair metal. That's just good, classic American 80s metal. Those are really good.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, revisit those. Those are cranking.
Oh, I get it. Believe me, I'm a huge fan.
Not going to be considered classics, but they're really damn good. So
as long as you don't look at them, as long as you don't look at them doing it, it's
man, that's some serious. Let me tell you something. Dimebag Darrell was a bona fide guitar hero at 16 years old, and nobody knew who he was.
That guy was. He even now, even with with his death and everything, his guitar prowess is really scary. I mean, if there's some YouTube videos of him, backstage and stuff like that, and just showing some of the tricks, how he gets the guitar to sound the way he does and stuff, and it's crazy. But I jumped forward a little bit. Their albums, starting with Cowboys from Hell, Vulgar Display of Power, Far Beyond Driven, and The Great Southern Trendkill, were 4 albums in a row that would literally rip your face off. I mean, they were just boom, 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 boom. And then Anselmo's Problems, with Reinventing Steel, it kind of fell flat for me. Still a fan, but and with Daryl's death, it kind of, it got funky. But I love Nola when Anselmo went to
Down.
and even Philip H. Anselmo and the Illegals and stuff. I still like his what he does, but those 4 albums in a row from Pantera for me were they kind of molded my musical chops in the early '90s, and I still to this day I can go pick up any one of those 4 albums, put it on, listen to it front to back, and just get pumped. If I'm in the gym or if I'm doing anything like that, or if I'm at work and I don't just want background noise, I put that on, and it just hammers through, and it just speeds the day up.
Yeah, you got no argument from me on that choice, and arguably you could say that Pantera during, well, maybe not the Cowboys album, but the next couple were arguably the biggest metal band in this country for those couple of years, because remember that they were popular at the height of grunge and alternative when most metal bands went back into the underground.
Exactly.
People weren't buying metal, but they were buying Pantera albums.
Yeah, I think Vulgar Display of Power came out like '92, like right in the meat and potatoes of grunge.
I think it was I think it still leaned enough into traditional rock, where some of those metal bands kind of went, counterproductive to grunge almost 180 to try and get themselves to stand out. Yep. I think those Pantera albums were enough in rock and still keeping that metal edge that's what really kind of set them above everybody else.
I think so too. But again, there's 4 Olympian athletes at their business too. I mean, Anselmo, Vinnie Paul, Daryl, and Rex Brown. I mean, it worked, and it's unfortunate that half of the Abbott brothers are gone now. I mean, that'll obviously never happen again. But those were big for me. That window of early '90s to late '90s there, Pantera albums were just blockbusters. 4 blockbusters in a row for me.
Yeah, I agree. Craig, what do you got?
So, where do I go? So, these 2 were kind of a toss-up for me, and not because of my likes, but more because of one's a newer band, and one's definitely a tried and true band that's been around for quite some time. So I'll probably go with that one first and leave the other one for later. But I have went back and forth with this band over and over again, to loving them, to hating them, to loving them, to hating them. But I think Kiss definitely fits what we're talking about tonight. Their first album was mediocre. Hotter Than Hell had a pretty decent hit on it. But when you get to Dress to Kill, from Dress to Kill to Destroyer to Rock and Roll Over to Love Gun to Dynasty, those sets of albums right there are like, you're picking hits off. You're picking 3 or 4 hits off each one of those albums, and a solid rock. And they're going to be looked at throughout history as, okay, call them a gimmick band if you want, but they're still going to get looked at in history of being one of the key foundations of rock and roll. And those albums back it up. Whether you hate them or love them at that point, or whether you hate part of them or the band or just the 2 guys at the front, those albums back up exactly what they were trying to do in the 70s.
I'm glad you named them, because they were on my list too. Now I can pick something else for my next one. But I will say I had every album from the first album through. You can include, a lot of people are going to be like, well, Dynasty, that's kind of a crappy album, but that still made a lot of money for the band.
Exactly.
But I would say, as far as a classic Kiss album, that first album through Love Gun, you've got to count them all.
Yep.
And even though the first 3 albums, the self-titled album, Hotter Than Hell, and Dress to Kill, didn't sell shit in this country or anywhere.
Nope.
It wasn't until they basically played all those songs live on the road and recorded the live album that they became what they became. But I think those first 3 albums are amazing. They have great songs on them, maybe not the best production in the world, and then, right after that, they were huge. And then you have all the follow-up albums with the big production and all that kind of stuff. But I agree with you. Those are all classic Kiss albums. Whether you love Kiss or not, there's no denying those albums.
Yeah.
I think my biggest dig on Kiss was the show. I don't think they needed as much, puking blood and fire and pyrotechnics to their music. I think is, and Craig, shut your mouth. I think it's overrated or underrated at times. I don't think they get enough accolades for the actual music that they produced and the actual quality of what they've done as far as in the genre of rock. There are a lot of bands that they did one thing that A, you can't copy them, but B, you can try to sound like them. Because if you look like them, you're going to get compared to Kiss. But if you sound like them, you're doing something right.
You know what it is? A lot's been said about exactly what you're talking about. And I think because Kiss came out in an era where there was a lot of virtuoso bands,
yes.
I think a lot of fans and the band themselves felt that they weren't good enough musicians, that they had to compete on a different level. So what they did was work really hard on their presentation, their stage show. But in actuality, you're absolutely right. They had the songs that should have been good enough, right? But I think we're all going to remember Kiss as this wild theatrical band in makeup who had great, memorable songs. And you know what? It's okay, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean they have one corner of the market and they're untouchable. I mean, I will say that. But they do have a lot. I mean, they've obviously got a catalog, and they do fall into that classic side. They've got a catalog full of hits. I mean, I don't know anybody that doesn't know at least one Kiss song. Even if you hate the band, don't listen to rock and roll, you know at least one Kiss song.
Oh, no, that one Kiss song is Rock and Roll All Night. I mean, that's...
even if it's that, there you go. You know at least one. I guarantee.
The women know Beth, I'm sure.
There you go. Yes.
And I Was Made for Loving You, right? The chicks know that.
Oh, why did they go disco? I'm not doing that. That whole.
Hey, there's another what if right there.
What if Kiss didn't do disco? They sold a lot of that album, though.
They did.
They did.
Just saying.
Craig, what do you got next?
A cough. No, that was me. That was Kiss. I think you're actually up, aren't you?
Am I?
Oh, yeah,
that's right. You were the Kiss. All right. Sorry.
Yeah.
All right. So since you took Kiss, I'm gonna go with a choice that I kind of wrote down at the last minute, and this is going to be controversial for a lot of people, but it's not controversial for me. So I'm going to pick the Scorpions here, and I know a lot of people are probably saying, "Well, but they had Blackout and Love at First Sting. What else?" All right. Well, in my opinion, the classic Scorpions albums go way back to the mid-'70s, at a time where really nobody was listening to them, no one was paying attention to them, no one was playing them on the radio, they weren't selling a lot of records. But they released a bunch of albums that nowadays, to a lot of maybe older hard rock and metal fans like myself, and a lot of guitar players and whatnot, look at Fly to the Rainbow, Virgin Killer, In Trance, Taken by Force, Love Drive, Animal Magnetism, and then Blackout and Love at First Sting as a ridiculously long string of influential, kick-ass heavy metal albums. That's it.
Love at First Sting was the first album I heard by the Scorpions, actually.
Mine was Blackout, but...
And I've always dug them. I've never seen them in concert or anything like that, but I always dug that sound. It was always different. I mean...
and the earlier albums, the ones before Blackout, are really different. Well, I'll say Love Drive is kind of similar, but if you look at they had a guitar player in the 70s. Their original guitar player was Michael Schenker, who then, 15 years old, went on to UFO, right? Then they replaced him with another German guitar player named Uli John Roth, who is an amazing player.
Yeah.
Kind of got this classical meets Jimi Hendrix type of thing. He kind of predated the whole neoclassical thing that Yngwie did. And those albums that he's on, which I mentioned before, are incredible. George, if you hadn't heard them, you definitely check them out. And it's and again, these weren't popular albums. There was no hit singles on. They didn't sell much of anything. But all these years later, a lot of real hardcore metal fans who have been following this genre since the 70s or what have you, look back on those albums as real metal, early metal classics, and really different from the commercial Scorpions that we knew in the 80s.
Sure.
That stuff's great too, but for me, I kind of lump all those albums together. I'm like, that is such a string of classic albums. It's kind of why we're doing this, right? So for me, it qualifies.
I agree, and there's like you said, if this is the best part about doing this stuff. Now I got to go listen to all the Doors catalog and all the early Scorpions catalogs. I got weeks worth of listening to do it.
I'll get back to you in a month, all right?
Yeah, all right. We'll have to push some of these recordings back. Yeah. No.
Right?
So.
All right, George, you're up.
So this is kind of falls. Well, it's early '90s again. Again, we talked before we started recording, Pete and I, that to deem it classic, this kind of falls into my classic because it's when I kind of first started getting into music and metal, late '80s and early '90s. The band Helmet put out
a long time. Wow.
Put out Meantime, Betty, Aftertaste, and Size Matters are 4 just grab you by the throat and punch you in the face hard rock heavy metal albums. And Meantime and Betty had a few, actually got some radio play in the meantime, and Ironhead got some airplay, but just loved what they did vocally. And I mean, the lead singer had a side project, Tomahawk, that did some good stuff too, but you never hear of this stuff. But they put out 4 consecutive. Their first 4 albums were just, for me, they put out 2 or 3 after that. They changed singers and then went back to the original singer, and it just had a different feel. But their first 4 albums were just absolutely beautiful hard rock heavy metal albums, and I kind of like the other stuff. I would recommend going back and visiting any or all 4 of their first 4 albums.
Are they still together? I haven't heard anything about Helmet in so many years.
The original drummer and the lead singer have been at odds for years. They toured a while back, and I think it's kind of back to, I think they're hit or miss at this point in the game. But I think they're playing small clubs just for beer money or something at this point. But I don't think they're, touring or recording anything as the original lineup. But I said those first 4 albums with those guys was just absolute quality rock and roll, and that's.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought them up because I haven't revisited them in a long time, and I remember a bunch of their tunes that I heard back in the day, and I kind of dug them. So good band.
Yeah, no, they've always been really high up on my list as far as like, when we started this, I said Def Leppard was the first one that came to mind, and then the next one was Helmet. It's like, man, because I can pick any one of those albums, put it on, and gets me where I need to be, even more so than Pantera.
Wow.
Wow. I'd say that again. I want to get that on recording. Make sure we're getting that.
It's already recorded. So
let's get that on recording right now, because yeah.
So, all right, let's move on. What do you got, brother?
Okay. Well, so we didn't put this as rock, right? I mean, we kind of left this open.
Yeah.
Do we say it is not rock?
Because rock, jazz, pop.
I know where you're going. Ooh, I know, because it was on my list too. But
was it?
I bet they are.
Tell me.
3 dudes from Brooklyn?
Yeah, 3 dudes from Brooklyn. So Beastie Boys is certainly on my list. The problem I've got with this band, well, not a problem with the band, but the problem I've got with them fitting into this is from License to Ill on basically is good for me. I mean, the problem I've got with this list, though, is Check Your Head is not really a Beastie Boys album, if that makes any sense. Like, it's more of a punk album. It's more of punk rock album. But still, it's old. It was a good album that they put out. And I think it sits in the list of their albums perfectly fine. With no, go ahead.
Is Tough Guy on Check Your Head?
I mean, is it a punk song? Because if it's a punk song, then yes. Yes. I'm looking, but maybe not. Huh. I thought I would have swore it was. It is not. Anyways, so Beastie Boys makes my list because, they're iconic anyways. Of any genre you look in that they played in, they were pretty iconic. But they weren't rock. So I just wanted to make sure that we were okay with putting one in there's not rock.
Why do they still get played on rock radio?
Well, I mean, you get Sabotage and you get License to Illhead. Didn't Kerry King play on one of the songs?
Fight for Your Right to Party.
Yeah, or No Sleep Till Brooklyn.
That you can't deny.
No, I think it was on No Sleep Till Brooklyn, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Yeah. They played a solo on that, but
Oh yeah, yeah.
I think most people look at these guys as kind of like one of the ultimate, like kind of crossover bands. They didn't really fit in any one genre. They kind of went in and out of every genre that was popular at the time. So, yeah.
But I think if you're looking at classic albums that they strung together, a really good list of hits and sales and really good songs on, I think they've kind of fit that bill for me.
Cool.
It's hard to deny. They were on my list as an honorable mention. So.
So is this our last one?
This is our last one.
No. Well, I got one more.
Oh,
I have 4. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah,
4.
actually, yeah, I've got one more as well. Okay. So this is
cool.
This is number 2.
You have 2 more, Pete. You could actually take 2 more off your list and talk about them.
All right. Well, I'm gonna. All right. So I'm gonna put my favorite band in here just because I can and because I know some people are gonna bitch that one of the albums in this string is not really classic Deep Purple, but you know what? Deep Purple in rock, Fireball, Machine Head, Who Do We Think We Are, Burn, Stormbringer, and Come Taste the Band. And then, quite frankly, they broke up for a bunch of years and came back with Perfect Strangers in '84. That's a really long line of classic albums. Arguably, someone can say, Who Do We Think We Are? Maybe not top shelf Deep Purple. Come Taste the Band and Stormbringer, maybe not top shelf Deep Purple. I don't really care. They are to me. So I'm going to do it. But even if we want it, in rock, Fireball and Machine Head are undeniable classics.
Sure.
So there's 3. I think
it was a 3-album list anyway, so
exactly. So they're going to make it regardless. But I think all of them should be included here. So
absolutely,
I'm picking next.
I had no argument here. I mean, I don't think they got as much. They weren't as looked at as big as a lot of other bands in their time, but I think all those albums can fit right into exactly what we were talking about. Yeah,
you know what it is? I think they had a smaller window. They were one of the biggest bands in the world for a very short time period.
Right.
They still were really big sellers and a big concert draw. But they never really hit the level of, like, say, a Zeppelin. Okay. Right. They were kind of like the next tier down, but they're looked at today as just as influential. And they sold a shitload of albums. So, and they toured all over the world. They had their own jet and all that kind of stuff. So, you know what? I'm picking them.
And they will forever be known as Craig learning to play guitar.
Shut up.
Anyway.
Everybody learning to play guitar. That's like the first thing you learned.
Smoke on the Water, Paranoid, and Iron Man. I think those are
exactly. Yes. Well, I actually learned Talk Dirty to Me by Poison, which my brother probably heard way too many times too, but yeah, we'll leave that alone.
Yeah, I heard a lot of them many times, but anyway.
So this is George's last one, right?
Yeah, this is my last one, and it's not much of a secret. Boston?
Did you say Boston already?
I told Pete before we went on the air, no, they're not. They could be considered that, but they're not on my list. And it's an early 90s band. Stone Temple Pilots, for me, is their first 4 albums are
fire.
Quintessentially that movement when the hard rock, I guess they were on the fringe of grunge. They probably get considered grunge a lot because their first album was 92 or 93. But Core, Purple, Tiny Music, Songs from the Vatican Gift Shop, and Number 4 to me are just unmistakable. I mean, they got so much radio play, sold so many albums, so many hits. And I think a lot of it was the notoriety of, the bands up and down with Scott Weiland and so on and so forth. But they just put out what I consider, like I said, the difference I think between Pete and I might be just a few years, but I think, Deep Purple is his wheelhouse, and Stone Temple Pilots that's my go-to band. They just, because there's slow melodic, there's really heavy rippers, there's everything in between, and it just, that band, those first 4 albums just speak to me, and it's one of my biggest disappointments, with Weiland, but I just saw them recently with this Jeff Goot, their new lead singer. They took like 2 years to they had like a worldwide audition for a singer, and this guy's fits the band, fills the bill, sounds like Weiland, but not too close. I mean, enough to hold his own, but it's just different enough. And they just released a new album that's spectacular. last year, a couple years ago maybe. But the first 4 albums, Stone Temple Pilots, far and away my number one, always will be. And you can argue if you want, but
I haven't heard the new music of the new singer, but I think you could probably say the same thing about what Alice in Chains have done.
absolutely.
They've done pretty well for them. I mean, I haven't listened to a lot of the stuff with their most recent singer, but what I've heard has been pretty damn good, and it's very eerily reminiscent of their classic stuff with Lane, right? So
Yeah, and that's the same way with this. The first single they released off that new album was Meadow, and or In the Meadow, something. I'm not exactly sure what the name of the title of the song is, but it's very good. It's if you like early mid '90s, hard rock, grunge rock, whatever you want to call it. I don't like to term them grunge rock. I think they stood out a little bit more. The DeLeo brothers were a little more talented and they worked better than most of that genre. So they're just, they get great radio play, great sales. Those first four albums are amazing, and that was my number one. So,
it's interesting because I was obviously joking with you because you're a Boston fan, and I kind of thought when you said that it wasn't Boston that you were going to take my number one, and I'm a little shocked. But you can probably guess my number one at this point, right? I mean, no.
AC/DC?
Yeah. Yes. So as far as popularity goes, you can't deny a lot of their albums being strung together, up until about, say, for those about the rock. But I would say Back in Black probably was obviously they're going to be their top of the list of the songs or the bands that are the albums that made them what they are. But going all the way back, even their Aussie stuff that they released, the High Voltage and TNT from, early Australian releases, all the way up through High Voltage and Dirty Deeds and Let There Be Rock and Powerage. And, if you want to put the hits in a place, or I'm sorry, the sales in a place, Highway to Hell, Back in Black, and For Those About the Rock are, those are mainstays. If you've got an album collection, those albums are stuck in it, and they're in there for a reason because they've got a lot of hits on them, or they were just an iconic band. So I think that definitely AC/DC falls within exactly what we were talking about.
Yeah, and I don't think there's an AC/DC fan alive who would deny that all those Bon Scott albums aren't classic albums. They absolutely are. So yeah. I think I agree with you. And they've had a lot of strong albums post For Those About to Rock, but I think For Those About to Rock and Back to the Very Beginning, that's classic AC/DC. And everyone, whether they sold a lot or not, is filled with classic AC/DC songs, right?
Yep.
And I love this pick, and I somehow totally did not put them down, but they absolutely. That's perfect for this kind of show.
It is.
The very reason I did not put them on my list is because Craig.
Because you knew they were going to be on mine.
I knew they were on his. I put the Beastie Boys on there too, but I knew they'd be on there too. That's why they were not on mine.
I'm just happy Craig didn't try to sell me on how the Spaghetti Incident is a great album.
I purposely did not go Guns N' Roses, and I think it honestly, and not again. I know we're kind of going off tangents here and there, but I would honestly say that before we kind of started talking, before we had you on Music Musing, and we've been on a couple of these, my love for Guns N' Roses hasn't waned, but I've really thought a lot about their first couple albums. You kind of mentioned, they really didn't have very many albums. They had basically the one album, a live and an acoustic, and then the double album. But those weren't. You could argue that the double one and the first one was maybe some type of iconic and seller. But you're right. I think they were a flash in the pan. They were right place at the right time, but they fell off really quick. And I've kind of realized that through our conversations as well. So.
No denying what they've done, though.
And you can't deny the influence of Appetite for Destruction. And we're not getting off on a Guns N' Roses tangent, but no denying that. So they don't have 3 albums in a row, so they don't count.
Right, exactly.
At least for this. All right, Pete. So
I'm going to go against my initial pick here because it's just so damn obvious. I was going to say Led Zeppelin, but I think we all know that every one of their albums is a classic, and that's not.
It's a gimme.
It's a gimme. So I'm going to go, and I hope we have a couple minutes just to do some honorable mentions at the end, but I'm going to go Van Halen next. I think Van Halen 1, Van Halen 2, Women and Children First, and Mean Streets. I don't know if, with the exception of maybe Zeppelin and Sabbath, I don't know if any other band ever in the history of like heavy music released 4 kick-ass opening statements like that.
I would agree with that.
That's undeniable.
Right?
I mean, like we talked about even before, if you're not even if you're not a huge fan like of Aerosmith or Guns N' Roses or whatever, it's undeniable. You cannot take what Van Halen put into rock and roll late 70s, early 80s, into the mid 80s. Because I mean, you could lump Diver Down and 1984. I mean, I think are possible. I wouldn't say possible, but they're plausible additions to the first 4 albums. It's undeniable. I mean, what Eddie Van Halen did for the sport of music is nothing short of brilliance.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about we were talking about how Guns N' Roses was like right band, right time. I think Van Halen was too, because
Sure.
The 70s were coming to a close. You had bands like Sabbath and Purple and Zeppelin who were kind of they had already been around for a decade and they're starting to slow down. And then all of a sudden, this brash young band with this flamboyant lead singer and this ridiculously talented guitar player, and with this crisp metallic sound that kind of took that like Ronnie Montrose band framework and took it to a whole nother level, ready for the 80s. It was like magic, right? And I absolutely agree with you. Back in the day, I was not a huge Van Halen fan, and I've grown to appreciate them more as I've gotten older. But man, those first, I'm not as big a fan of Diver Down in '84 as I am of those first 4. I think those first 4 to me are just like top.
Sure. But I think that falls into what we were talking about, though. I mean, try to deny, the album 1980.
Well, you can't, because they were big sellers and a lot of people love them, right? And
and the hits, I mean, the radio, I mean, the play, I mean, even Diver Down got.
And you can go as far as 5150 too, because that album was enormous.
To me,
different bands though, right?
See, that's the debate. I prefer Hagar, but I love the idea of the band. I think because changing lead singers, I think they're unique in that situation in and of itself, because they changed lead singers, but they went, out of, I wouldn't say necessity, but out of intent.
Yeah.
Like, we're done with Dave, we fired him, and now, we're going with Sammy Hagar. Sammy Hagar already had, musical prowess. He already had, the Red Rocker. He already had albums, and he already had sales, and he was already popular. But I think if you lump Van Halen, the term Van Halen together, they've probably got arguably one of the best catalogs of any band to stretch from the late 70s clear into the 2000s.
Do they have a bad album? I mean, let's take Gary Sharon out. Hold on. Let's take
Van Halen 3. Yeah.
Hold on.
No, I think a couple of those Sammy albums now, listening to them now, they're not that good.
I think they mailed some of that in because they were just, I think in the mid 90s, they were just trying to piss Dave off. I think they were just trying to make music. Maybe, I don't know.
Unfortunately, those Sammy albums came during a time period where that's kind of how arena rock was going. There's a lot of like heavier bands that kept doing music in the 80s, and they all had that kind of sound. It was kind of poppy, it's just the way things were. I don't know if those albums would have ever been any better. I remember when he first joined the band, I was because remember, I'd said before, I really wasn't that into Van Halen early on. So when he joined, I was always a Hagar fan. When he joined, I kind of got into Van Halen for the first time.
Right.
But now, like all these years later, I almost never listen to those Hagar albums. I go through the first albums.
Yeah, I saw them in concert in like '92 in the Monsters of Rock tour, and it was a stadium tour, and it was big production, and I liked it. I mean,
live they were good. They were great live. Yeah.
I mean, Craig and I argue. I mean, I take Hagar over Roth a lot, but the music is undeniable. Just like you said, it's
absolutely. Yeah.
Just like the first 4 Led Zeppelin albums are a gimme. You can't deny what Van Halen did for rock and roll, and the consecutive hits. And like you said, the first 4 albums just bam, 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 and right out of the box, and just blew your face off. So
absolutely
great stuff.
So George, you got any honorable mentions?
I did. I had well, I'll just do one. I had Tool was on my list.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, hell yeah. Yeah.
Because the popularity is staggering with that band. I mean, there are people losing their mind when they're gonna release a new album. With Tool, that's kind of an honorable mention that I don't think they made a bad album.
No, I agree with you. And I'll go even one step further. I think if they would have released albums a little quicker, probably would have been the biggest band on the planet. And it's their own fault that they're not. Right, but scarily, they're pretty damn close, even just dangling that carrot for what, years now, right? 3, 4 years, 5 years? That's been at least? Yeah, I think it's longer. Yeah, and I think you can pick anything. I mean, there's some of their early stuff is raw and exquisite rock and roll, and some of their later stuff is polished and very surreal, very progressive. Yeah, very different. Yeah, and just great. I mean, you can you really get they're and not to draw a comparison, but they're kind of like this generation's Pink Floyd. They're almost psychedelic. They're surreal. They go a lot of different directions. There's really heavy rockers, and then there's really 12-minute instrumentals. There's some really radical stuff on there, and anything in between. But Maynard is Maynard. I mean, he's going to do what he's going to do. But he's got half a dozen side projects, and I did get the chance. I didn't get to see Tool, but I saw Pussifer live, and that was one of the most amazing shows I'd ever seen. He did this hour-long monologue while he himself set up the stage, the drum kit, the microphones. He plugged everything in. He moved all the amps, and he was talking the whole time, and he did an hour-long monologue. And then they played a 2-hour show with the band, and it blew me away because nobody helped him put one thing up on that stage, set up all the lights, everything. I was blown away. It was amazing. That's pretty cool. Yeah, it was cool. So Tool was my honorable mention because I don't think they made a bad album. So cool. How about you, Craig?
I honestly, as much as I hate to say this band because it's almost a gimme, but I mean they had some areas that weren't so great, but I would have to put the Beatles in this group of stuff we're talking about. Yeah. I mean, their first couple albums were very poppy, obviously, but they still may have hits. They still had hits that got played on the radio. Even when they kind of changed, who they were and how they were making music, they still were producing hits. And I think that I would be remiss if I didn't put them in this group of bands that we're talking about because they're iconic albums and they're still close enough to rock to be considered, what we were talking about.
Oh yeah. I mean, come on, Revolver, Rubber Soul, and
White Album, everything,
White Album. And, yeah. I mean, I absolutely agree. I think you can make an argument for 4 or 5 great Beatles albums in a row, 4 or 5 really great, probably more Rolling Stones albums in a row. 3, 4, 5 really great albums in a row. I think all 3 of those bands deserve to be mentioned here. Absolutely. Right, and I considered a lot of those, but then I kind of thought, well, if this is going to be a rant, it's going to be like stuff that I would listen to or that I consider. I mean, I tried to tiptoe that line, like. Yeah, okay, Led Zeppelin, AC/DC. There's a lot of obvious ones, right? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So I wanted bands that people would agree with me, but also maybe hadn't heard so much of type of thing. Because you could make an argument for Journey. You could make an argument. I mean, a lot of the corporate rocks, Bad Company. There's a lot of, Foreigner. There's a lot of those that, 3, 4 albums in a row there that, late 70s, early 80s that were just undeniable. Yep. But I just wanted something a little bit off. You could again. So whoever brought it up to you that you can't name a bunch of bands that don't have 3 good albums in a row. I think we proved them wrong at least.
Myth busted.
Yeah, I mean we've only scratched the surface. I mean,
right, exactly, and we avoided the major one.
Yeah. So I mean, shit. I haven't talked about Rush. I haven't talked about Judas Priest or Iron Maiden. What else didn't I get here too? You're right. We didn't even talk about Metallica. Quite frankly, Metallica's first album, and you could say their first 5 are classics.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I've kind of soured on the Black Album in years, but still, it's a classic album, right?
Sure, it's undeniable.
Yes, Kansas, Jethro Tull, Genesis. I mean, I can go on and on.
That's exactly what I did. I was like, started naming all of them, like the Who, and it's like, nah, you know what? I'm gonna calm it a bit and just try to get it, down where it's palatable to what I would like to listen to, what I consider classic, and kind of semi-mainstream stuff. And I think we covered all the bases here, fellas. I don't know.
And there's probably a lot more. So to our readers who kind of inspired this little rant, we thank you because it made for great conversation.
Absolutely.
Very good conversation.
Hopefully we've shown that there are a lot more bands out there that have, more than 3 really strong albums in a row. There's a ton of them. We've only just scratched the surface. So,
and hopefully whoever your readers or listeners or watchers or subscribers are, realize that maybe they'll revisit some of this stuff or check it out or think a little bit more about their favorite bands. Because, I mean, there's a lot of bands out there that put out a lot of great music. And like you said, we barely scratched the surface. And this was
absolutely
with barely trying. So
revisit those discographies, folks. There's a lot of great stuff out there. Trust
Agreed.
it. Well, guys, thanks so much for spending this hour plus in a very cool rant. I think hopefully everybody will enjoy this. So, guys, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you on the internet?
We are on pretty much any platform where you can find podcasts under Music Musing, no S at the end of it. We're under musicmusing _ on Twitter. You can reach out to us at musicmusingfeedback@gmail.com, or you can look up Craig or George Sybert on pretty much any social media, and you'll be able to find us pretty easily.
That's Sybert, Sybert.
Yep, that's us.
That's right. Cool. Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate having you on.
Thanks for having us.
Don't touch that dial because they're coming right back. We've got another edition of our What If show, so you'll want to stay tuned and check that out. So we'll see you real soon. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the time. So don't go away. We'll see you real soon. Bye, guys.
See ya.